What's up, softball players? I'm Coach Dan Blewett. In today's video, let's talk about, does sidearm throwing hurt your arm? Is it more stressful than overhand throwing? Is sidearm something you should avoid? This is a myth out there that I've heard. I've gotten a couple comments. I've got an email recently about this. Should I throw sidearm? Or, I've heard this is going to hurt my arm. My coach or former player said sidearm is bad for me. So let's sort through the good and the bad of sidearm. All right, so first thing, I'm going to cover a bunch of different topics about sidearm throwing and the mechanics of throwing in general, and I'm going to link to the videos that I mentioned in the description. So I'm not going to elaborate into too much detail on all these. I'm going to keep this video quick, but there's detailed explanations, again, in other videos that I've already done explaining the mechanics of shoulder tilt, of sidearm throwing, of throwing on the run, all that stuff. So check out the description below if you want to follow up and go into more depth about the stuff that I cover here. So number one, let's debunk this myth. Sidearm is absolutely not bad for your arm. Number one, think about high-level softball and high-level baseball. If you watch an MLB baseball game, you'll see 4 infielders who throw a sidearm 95% of the time. They have the least amount of injuries of anyone on the field. Who has the most injuries on the field? Baseball pitchers who throw overhand all the time. I've had 2 elbow surgeries, and I didn't throw sidearm for a living. So just from a logical standpoint, there is no real correlation between the arm slot that you throw, except that throwing over the top, a more traditional arm slot, is definitely worse for your arm because you can produce a lot higher velocities. So the biggest thing they found in throwing mechanics research, which all the research is done on baseball players typically, is that the higher velocity you throw at, the more you expose yourself to a risk of injury. So throwing 95 miles per hour with a baseball is going to be a lot more risky for your arm than throwing 70 miles per hour with a football or throwing 65 mile per hour with a softball. So velocity is heavily tied. And the thing about sidearm is you don't get as much of your body into it, so you can't throw a ball sidearm as hard. I could throw into the mid-90s overhand. I could probably throw a ball on the run sidearm, maybe 70, 75 tops, and that's pretty firm. So again, the lower velocity is protective on the arm. So if you're having pain throwing sidearm, so say you've been throwing overhand for a while and now you're trying sidearm and it bothers your arm, it's just going to be because you're not used to it yet. It's something brand new. You're putting new stress through your arm. You're using, your same muscles, but in a different way, because sidearm is not exactly the same as overhand. Let's all concede that now. So just because it's new, that might be why it bothers you initially. Now, there is a right way to throw with sidearm mechanics, which again, I'll link in the description below to the other sidearm mechanics videos that I've made. So if you want to learn how to do it properly, you can do that. There is good and bad technique for throwing sidearm, but typically, I have not seen any correlation with mechanics and arm pain in the past. I've worked with lots of softball players who have bad throwing mechanics who are perfectly healthy. They don't have any pain. They just don't throw very hard. I've also met a lot of softball players who have great mechanics who do have arm pain. So there isn't, the mechanics of it is, there is a protective effect, but also having great mechanics allows you to throw really hard, which then can also put you in that area where if you throw a ball 100 miles per hour, you have a much higher risk of hurting your arm that way. So the mechanics part of it isn't really the typical cause for throwing pain. The typical cause for throwing pain is young players who are growing. So their growth plates are open. There's a lot of growth plate inflammation. The other part is weak shoulder muscles. When you have a weak shoulder, when you have a weak rotator cuff, the rotator cuff is the group of muscles that controls the movement of your scapula, which is your shoulder blade and your shoulder socket. When you have weak shoulders, which most young athletes do, baseball and softball, that's typically the biggest contributor to throwing arm pain because all those throws, you'll make hundreds in a weekend playing a softball tournament. It's a lot of repetitive stress, and that's typically why your body has pain. Now, again, that stuff you should always get checked out by a doctor in the area. So if you have pain, you shouldn't be searching for the answer on YouTube videos. You should be consulting someone in your area. But again, the big thing is sidearm is not inherently dangerous in any sense, not any more than any other type of throwing. The other thing to think about is that sidearm is just a different body tilt. And again, I will explain this in a video. I have a very detailed video about shoulder tilt. But basically, when you throw overhand, your body tilts at the trunk like this. When I throw sidearm, the only difference is that my trunk tilt is different. So I'm horizontally trunk tilted, like I'm level across the shoulders, so I throw sidearm. When I tilt my trunk higher up, now I have a quote unquote more normal over the top arm slot. So really the where the arm is in space is like in relation to my shoulders and the rest of my body doesn't really change depending on my arm slot. Really the big thing that changes is my shoulder tilt. And again, to see this in action with examples and slow motion and stuff, I've got a good video that I did like last year. So the last thing I want to mention is that it's necessary to throw sidearm when you're on the run. And I've also explained this in videos. I'll link below. I'm a broken record, but throwing on the run, you can't produce this shoulder tilt because you wouldn't be running and throw like this and you'd look ridiculous. It's athletically, essentially almost impossible. When you're on the move as an infielder and you're going to make that play across the diamond, sidearm is the only biomechanically proper way to do it. It's the only way your body wants to make that throw. So sidearm is not only a different type of throw, but it's a necessary type of throw for infielders who are going to constantly field and get rid of it quickly. That's why you see MLB baseball players constantly throwing sidearm, because they're constantly charging the ball and they're not stopping and they're going to throw. And then that just sort of becomes the default throwing mechanics for them. You see this in high-level softball too. You just don't see it quite as much because players aren't as comfortable with it because they're not taught it so much, because there's a lot of myths that's like this one, that sidearm is bad for you, which it's not. So hopefully this video is helpful. Obviously, I want players to be healthy. I want them to have the tools to do great in softball, play different positions, and have fun. Like throwing is one of my favorite things. And so I'm making this video to simply debunk myths so that you can feel confident, go out there, teach the game the right way, practice the things you want to practice, and then open up a bigger world of softball. Making these plays on the run and throwing sidearm is fun, and it's also very effective and also necessary at higher levels. When girls get really, really fast, you won't get them out at first base unless you're charging and getting rid of it quick, and often that requires you to throw sidearm, all right? If you have any questions or comments, leave one in the description below or in the comment section below. And again, I have a bunch of videos all related to this that you'll find in the description to help you with your sidearm throwing, all right? Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.